So you might have heard a lot of hype around the MCP protocol and agentic AI, and maybe you want to understand what's going on underneath. So what we're doing here is we've got various chat interfaces and so on that go through a protocol and then can talk to databases and Google. So these chat interfaces, whether it's like a web-based chat or Claude or whatever, somehow talk to a large language model and somehow get data from different systems. So let's kind of have a look what's going on underneath. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do is show what it looks like actually to call a large language model. It's probably, given the power that it gives you, it's one of the simplest APIs that you can call. So just using curl. I've already set up an API key, by the way. So I'm using a service called Grok, but whether you use OpenAI or whatever, the API is the same, even if you're using local language models. So let's get that. It's pretty quick. So this is what it looks like to talk to a model. We get back like a bunch of data. So we can see in there somewhere, this is the response that it's going to give us. Okay, we were saying, what's the price of Bitcoin? I'm not able to provide real-time data, blah, 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 blah. Basically, it can't do it. Okay, and why would it? Large language models are not connected to the internet or to systems. Okay, now what I'll do is show you something that was added recently to large language models and the way they're trained. Like previously, they were sort of trained to respond straight away. But what OpenAI added later on is like another part of the API. So most of the API stays the same. We specify the model and we have our user request. Okay. But what we can also do is add what's called tools. So in this case, it's like we're not really adding a tool here. We're adding a tool definition. So what we're going to say here is to the model, we've got this tool called Get Bitcoin Price, and it takes some parameters. So basically, what's going to happen now is we send the same request to the model, but now the model knows that it has a tool that could answer the question. So this is what we're going to get back from the model, rather than a message saying, you know, I don't have access to real-time market data. The model makes what's called a tool request. So the model comes back and say, hey, I want to call the function Get Bitcoin Price, okay? And I want to call it for USD, US dollars. So how do we find an MCP server actually, that's going to give us Bitcoin prices? So we can use one of the MCP marketplaces and do a quick search. And there we can, we get several for Bitcoin actually. And then looking at this particular project, I think they want us to go to the GitHub. So how do we install that and use it? It kind of varies between different MCP servers. So in this case, they want us to run almost from the source code, but we're not going to do that. That's like kind of putting executables onto our laptops, and we want to avoid that. So we're going to use a service like deploy, which will run MCP servers for us in the cloud. So let's log on there. And then we can select a server, in this case, Bitcoin. Okay, I already added one before actually. And then we can configure an API key. And then from there, what we can get is an MCP URL. And what I'm going to do is take this URL and set it into an environment variable. We're also going to need an API key. So let's create one of those. We can specify a request to list the tools that this server provides. And this server's telling us that it provides basically one tool called getTicker, which gets a Bitcoin price. Okay, and we can see that there. So now we can also call that tool, and we get something like this. So we can see we've made a tool call to the getTicker. It doesn't take any parameters, so we just go ahead and we start to get the prices back for the price looking really good, actually. We've seen kind of both sides of the protocol. So we know that we can call a model and kind of get it to request tool calls. We can talk to an MCP server and say, hey, what tools have you got? And basically the way the protocol works is with these, when we list the tools, the format that we get almost perfectly matches the format that the model wants. So with an MCP server, we can call one or more, get all of those tool definitions, pass it to the model. Then we can ask questions to the model, and the model will come back and say, hey, call this for me. And then we go away and we make that call like that, and we get the results. And what do we do with those results? Well, basically, we pass it back to the model. So you can see here, here's the whole conversation, if you like. What is the price of Bitcoin? And the model's made this tool call request. And what we do is we pass back a tool call response, which is basically, we have to sort of match these IDs, we match the tool name, and then we pass the content back almost exactly that we got from the MCP server. And then the model will come back and say, okay, the price of Bitcoin is da, 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 da. So that's the way it works. With all of these clients that you see, and you see people talking about agentic AI, it's the model making tool call requests. We're using MCP servers to get tool definitions and to actually execute the tool calls. And then that's all pushed back to the model. The model can see the results and provide an answer. So I hope that was helpful in kind of looking at underneath of how the protocol works. It's relatively simple. There's some super magic that goes on with the model, but from a sort of developer point of view, it's relatively simple. Okay, thanks very much. And if you want to see more content like this, then just subscribe. Thank you.